Never read Fitzgerald? You gots to be kidding me. My name is Paulina. Welcome to Paulina's Pages, where we laugh, we cry, we complain about books from classics to YA. I'm finally back with my read and discuss segment where I give you a brief intro to almost everything you need to know about the book in 15 minutes or less. I'm sorry for the delay. I've been in a bit of a classic slump lately, but I'm hard at work on some new videos, so wait for more. And right now, of course, it's June, so I decided to pick up an LGBTQI+ classic. And yeah, I hope you enjoyed the video. First of all, we're gonna talk about the author, then about the historical context for the book, brief summary, I'm gonna keep it as short as possible. Fourth, we have some analysis, and finalement, my review. So James Baldwin, he was a writer of many things, essays, novels, plays. He was also a voice of the American Civil Rights Movement. Born in 1924 in Harlem, you might remember the details about Harlem from my video on Zora Hurston, and I'll link it in the card. After moving to New York City, a place populated with writers and artists, he began to start writing a novel. Although he was talented at reading and writing from a young age, he took odd jobs to help him write the novel and cover the expenses, and then in 1945 he got a fellowship, which of course helped. His first novel was published in 1953. It's called Go Tell It on the Mountain. It was semi-biographical and talked about his struggles with his relationship with his father and some religious struggles. Giovanni's Room was published in 1956. James Baldwin then continued to establish himself as one of the greatest writers of the 20th century. However, by the early 1970s, he had a change in his mentality because he witnessed a lot of violence based on racial hatred. For example, the assassination of Martin Luther King Jr. Many critics say that the turning point that you can really see in his writing was the novel No Name in the Street. Baldwin died on December the 1st, 1987. So obviously Baldwin had a lot of difficulties publishing the book. He said that his agent Strauss told him to burn the manuscript. He later denied this. Another editor, Carlyle, wrote back that although the writing was good, it didn't have a lot of credible characters and wouldn't serve Baldwin's reputation. As well as that, Baldwin was expected to write stories about Black people and their experiences, and this was a novel about two gay white men. So this was definitely not what they were expecting. Another thing to consider is the general perception of homosexuality at the time. So for example, in America, some quick facts, let me throw them out. So in 1950, Harry Hay and several other men founded the Mattachine Society that was involved in two landmark gay cases, prominently police harassment. Second, the psychiatric community regarded homosexuality as a mental illness. In 1953, Eisenhower issued an order that said gay men and lesbians couldn't work in federal agencies because he believed that they were susceptible to blackmail, because it was so scary and difficult and terrible being a gay person at the time, because you could face a lot of persecution and people were made to fear and people were mainly closeted. He thought that people could be blackmailed into giving away government secrets to the communists. And fourth, in 1960, every state had a law against sodomy. Sodomy laws are laws defined as unnatural or immoral sexual acts being treated as crimes. Anti-sodomy laws are defined as serving or intended to prevent or punish sodomy, according to Merriam-Webster. So what about French homosexuality in the 1950s? This is what Richard Dyer says. The post-war period was markedly homophobic. The anti-gay legislation introduced under Vichy in 1942 was maintained, and the Paris police began cracking down on homosexuality from 1949 on. Anti-gay laws were to be strengthened under Charles de Gaulle. Paris was a safe place for gay people? No. But the art scene was relatively inclusive. In Giovanni's Room, there's a gay bar. Even though everyone knows it's a gay bar, no one actually speaks out about it, and they're all sort of ashamed, and it's this internalized homophobia, but we'll talk about that when we get to the analysis part. Everyone kind of knows that Giovanni and David are a thing. They don't walk on the streets holding hands, even though the people that they meet do actually know. The novel starts off with David reminiscing about the events of his life. It's revealed to us that the love of his life, Giovanni, is dead and it is David's fault. Slowly we go back in time and we kind of uncover the events, what happened. And this summary part will obviously include spoilers, so if you haven't read the book and you want to read it without any spoilers whatsoever, you have been warned, but please do come back later. David is American. His first sexual encounter was with his friend Joey. They both found themselves pulled towards each other, but then afterwards David feels like disgust. He leaves his friend Joey in the room. He basically avoids his friend for the entire summer because he feels terrible that he slept with a man. His mother died when he was 5. He was raised by his aunt and by his father, and he had a difficult relationship with both of them. He leaves America for France and finds himself destitute. He turns to Jack to ask for money. Jack is relatively old, gay, rich, and lonely. He lends people money so that they hang out with him, which is sad. So together with David, they go to a bar. The bar is owned by Guillaume, so that's the gay bar. And at the bar, they see this bartender and he's this attractive Italian man. So Jack's like, David, introduce me. And David's like, okay. And then David goes to the bartender, but the man is so attractive and he's like, wow, he's top tier. And then they really hit it off, and poor Jack's just in the distance while all this is going on. Yeah, then they take a car and they go around the city together. They go to a specific place, but that's not particularly relevant. And Jacques and Guillaume, they keep making jokes about them being gay, which make David and Giovanni extremely uncomfortable, which is also kind of weird because they're all gay. So yeah, after some events, David ends up living with Giovanni in Giovanni's room, which by the way is a critical setting, but onto that later. However, plot twist, David has a fiancée named Hella who is currently in Spain, but her imminent return to Paris is hanging over the two lovers' heads. They share some tender moments, but it feels like David isn't giving himself to Giovanni completely, and their relationship is like two bodies rather than two actual people who love each other. Guillaume becomes jealous of their relationship and accuses Giovanni of being a thief, and then he fires him. And then when Giovanni is at his lowest because he doesn't have a source of income, that's when Hella sends a letter and she's like, I'm back. Call that imperfect timing because David goes to meet her. Yeah, the timing is not great, but is there even good timing? Is there even such a thing as good timing when your fiancé is coming back while you're in the middle of exploring your homosexual tendencies? David leaves without warning, which is just... yeah, because he and Hella, they go around, they go to cinemas, they really hit it off. And then meanwhile, Giovanni's like running around telling people to search the river because he thinks David is dead. Yeah, that's a bit uncomfortable. But then eventually they run into him, they have an argument. David is an absolute pain. We do not like David. He just stops on Giovanni's feelings and pretty much leaves. David comes back to get his stuff because his stuff is still there. They have another argument, and that's just like the really tragic scene because as David is leaving, if Giovanni had said to stay, he probably would have stayed. So time passes, and then from the newspapers we discover that Giovanni killed Guillaume. David speculates on why exactly that happened. He thinks it's because Giovanni went back to beg Guillaume for his job, and then Guillaume basically said like, if you sleep with me, the job is yours. Then Giovanni realizes that he's so disgusted by the old man. They get into a fight and Giovanni like strangles the old man with his robe because that's what the murder weapon was. So later Giovanni is caught and sent to the guillotine, and that's when David is left to reflect and grieve on what went wrong. So that's basically it. 170 pages of intense storytelling condensed into however long that just took me to explain. So for this section, I decided to point out just like the relevant things that I thought were important. Let's start with Hella. She's the unknowing fiance. She's traveling around Spain, but after a few months of solo traveling, she realizes that the society only sees women in relation to men, and so she thinks that her only choice is basically to marry David, and that's the only way for her to get opportunities as a woman in society. What do you want, Hella? What have you got now that makes such a difference, David? She laughed. It isn't what I've got. It isn't even what I want. It's that you've got me, so now I can be your obedient and most loving servant. Hella is extremely candid with her words, and I feel like I can feel her sadness. In these words, she's trying to convince herself that she will be happy. So on to the second important character, Giovanni. He lived in a small Italian village. He was married. His life was pretty perfect, but then his first born child was a stillborn, and he spit on Jesus's cross and he left for Paris, and now he believes that his struggles in Paris are Jesus's punishments for him. I was vividly aware that he held a brick in his hand. I held a brick in mine. It really seemed for an instant that if I did not go to him, we would use these bricks to beat each other to death. Yet I could not move at once. We stared at each other across a narrow space that was full of danger, that almost seemed to roar like flame. "Come," he said. I dropped my brick and went to him. In a moment, I heard his fall, and at moments like this, I felt that we were merely enduring and committing the longer and lesser and more perpetual murder. The relationship is a complex and nuanced one, but of course, could there be any other ones? David resents that Giovanni kind of leaves him and he's left to his own devices. He thinks he's the woman in the relationship, and because of his difficult feelings with his mother and all of that, plus the room is pretty small, so they're in tight quarters, and that doesn't help. It's emotionally difficult. Giovanni opens himself up to David completely, but as mentioned before, David doesn't, and I think that Giovanni kind of senses it, because David says that it's his first encounter with a man, even though it's not. There was of course his childhood friend that he abandoned, and there's also the difference of nationalities. When Giovanni wanted me to know that he was displeased with me, he said I was a vrai américain, real American. Conversely, when delighted, he said that I was not an American at all. And on both occasions, he was striking deep in me, a nerve which did not throb in him. And I resented this, resented being called an American, and resented resenting it, because it seemed to make me nothing more than that, whatever that was, and I resented being called not an American because it seemed to make me nothing. Throughout the book, there are a lot of generalizations about, for example, being American, nationalities, and being women, and I think it's partly because of David's character. He's very self-absorbed, I think we can all agree, and I think he also sees the world in terms of good and bad. His feelings about love, good, but his feelings about men, bad. The way he treats people around him is abhorrent. This is just what I got from the book. Of course, we're not told directly. This is just what I think. So please, of course, make your own judgment, and do leave me a comment because I'm interested. You never have loved anyone. I am sure you never will. You love your purity. You love your mirror. You're just like a little virgin. You walk around with your hands in front of you as though you have some precious metal, gold, silver, rubies, maybe diamonds down there between your legs. So Giovanni says this, and I believe this to be accurate too, because David sees things in black and white, and this whole thing with purity and being good and good and bad. I think that's definitely part of the reason why he can't commit himself and only loves himself. You want to leave Giovanni because he makes you stink. You want to despise Giovanni because he's not afraid of the stink of love. You want to kill him in the name of, oh, your lying little moralities. And you are immoral. You are by far the most immoral man I have met in all my life. Look what you have done to me. Do you think you could have done this if I did not love you? Is this what you should do to love? Their argument, I think, was potentially the climax of the book. Giovanni opens up and really reveals what he thinks about David. Before that, there was kind of a feeling that Giovanni didn't exactly think that he was perfect. He's not. You can clearly see his flaws, but it's just that now he's actually acknowledging them, and it's not a quirky side effect of love, Maybe he realized, and before that he was just living in denial. Actually, throughout the book there's a whole feeling of living on borrowed time, and yeah, I just think that's really tragic, especially the scene where this disillusionment happens. And this particular line really broke my heart. Now that you're leaving, you want the windows closed, bien sûr. So again, this was Giovanni to David when they are parting. When the windows were open, there was air and a sense of partial freedom. Now the windows are closed and there's no going back. And before that, David was half committed. He was 1 foot outdoor with Hella, but he could also return to Giovanni, and now there's the sense of finality, and he's leaving Giovanni. David has, without embellishing it, sorry, there's no professional way that I can refer to this, David has mommy issues. His mom died when he was 5, and I think that definitely played a role. His he doesn't want to be the wife of the relationship so much. That annoys me so much when people ask gay couples. They're like, oh, who's the wife in your relationship? That's rude and insensitive on so many levels. So he doesn't want to be the wife, yet when he talks with Hella, he really doesn't realize what her issue is with being a woman, even though he himself doesn't want to be a woman. He's homophobic. but he sleeps with men. I think that's part of the reason that he doesn't realize what's going wrong with Hella in their relationship. For someone so self-absorbed, he does a grand total of 0 soul searching. In this room, he feels safe enough, yet at the same time he hates it. I think that's kind of an allusion to the way that he feels about his homosexuality. He likes the feelings, again, that he has with other men, but he really hates that he's like this. He judges everything though, and just warning you in advance, he's not a very pleasant narrator. So the shortness and intensity of Giovanni's room will stay with you for a long time. The writing is beautiful and I definitely want to consume more of Baldwin in the future. I like the broad range of all the subjects that were covered, homosexuality, like women and how people view them. I like the tragedy as well. I mean, obviously I hated it, but I think now there's a tendency in YA to over-romanticize relationships, because especially gay relationships, because even though it's great when gay couples are coming out and their parents are supportive, it's not always like this, and it would just be nice to have a deeper kind of range of representation in literature that we have. It doesn't exactly happen according to the books. It's an even tougher blow, so I'm happy that this was a tragedy in a way. It showed a broader range of real life. Tragedy happens in real life. The only reason I lowered my reading for this book is because I felt that there could have been more tender like moments to represent their relationship, and also a bit more work on David's emotions and like feelings and regrets at the end of the book. However, I also understand that some aspects, characters are not obligated to emerge completely changed and different people by the end of the book. So yeah, I understand that aspect of it too. 4.5 stars. Thank you so much for watching this video. I really hope you enjoyed it, and I hope you subscribe to my channel. And yeah, thank you so much and see you next week.